Hello again and welcome back to our RSA Conference 2024 live stream. I'm Jameson Cush with Tech Target Editorial and Ion Tech, joined once again by Sabrina Poland.
Happy to be here, Jameson.
So Sabrina, during our last live stream I was saying there are 50,000 cybersecurity professionals and experts here at the show. But when it comes to cloud security, perhaps none more knowledgeable than our guest, Michael Ratemo, Principal Consultant of Cybersecurity Simplified. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
Happy to have you.
So to kick things off, I guess maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background and your involvement here at the show.
So sure, I've been in the tech industry for the last 20 years. I started off in a field called information assurance. Then I moved on to cybersecurity, and then got into cloud security, which I'm focusing on right now. So I love this field so much that I actually wrote a book, Cloud Security and Audit Fundamentals in Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Azure. And I also wrote a LinkedIn Learning course, Cloud Audit Foundations, in same platforms, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. And my thing is I want to enable the masses to understand cloud security. It sounds complicated, but it's not necessarily as complex as it may seem to be. As far as the conference, I'm a speaker. I'll be speaking on Wednesday. The title of my talk is going to be Do Not Be a Cloud Misconfiguration Statistic in AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. And it's actually a format called the Learning Lab. So it's 2 hours. I've created some sandboxes where I'm going to have the participants actually get behind the keys and go through the platforms, AWS, and identify misconfigurations. We look at something called Cloud Security Posture Management Solutions that we use to mitigate these misconfigurations. We'll talk about what the root causes of misconfigurations are, what kind of things you need to do to remediate and mitigate these misconfigurations, and just good security practices that you need to have in the cloud.
So let's talk about cloud security for a second. Almost every organization uses the cloud in some part of the organization. And a big selling point of these cloud vendors is that security is included, and most organizations assume that to a full extent. Is that a misconception? Is that true? And what should businesses be aware of when a vendor claims security is included?
That's a very interesting question. So I'd like to say yes, but with a caveat.
Okay.
So when we're talking about the big cloud providers, the hyperscalers, so Amazon Web Services, the Microsoft Azure, Google Clouds, Oracles, they have invested a lot of money in security, right? So money they've spent, most organizations cannot spend the amount of money they have within their security on-premise, right? So, but in the cloud, we have what's called shared accountability. So the cloud service provider is accountable for some things within their cloud platform, and the cloud customer is responsible to do other things, right? So it's something we call the shared responsibility model.
Okay.
So like the cloud service provider is responsible for the security of the cloud itself, right? Mm-hmm. The infrastructure of the cloud. Whereas the cloud customer is responsible for security in the cloud. So they're responsible for security of the data, they're responsible for access management, and depending on the cloud service model, they also may be responsible for some infrastructure they create. Mm-hmm. So for instance, say you are in an infrastructure as a service model where you creating your own infrastructure, you know, Google or AWS is not going to secure that for you. You have to go in there and secure if it's a virtual machine, if it's an EC2 instance, if it's a Google Compute Engine instance, you have to implement the security in there. You know, so as long as the cloud customer is doing their part in implementing security, then overall the cloud, I would argue, is more secure than being on-premise.
Mm-hmm. So about the cloud customer doing their part, what should they look for when vetting cloud security options, or what?
Yes, so good question. So when they're looking at cloud service providers, I tell people they need to ask them certain key questions, right? The first thing you want to ask your cloud service provider is, number one, what's your SLA, what's your service level agreement, right? So you want to make sure the cloud service provider can support the service that you need. So for instance, if you have an e-commerce website that needs to be up pretty much all the time, you want a service provider that can provide you that 99.999% availability. You know, you want to look for them having different regions, different availability zones, that kind of thing. Second question you want to ask these cloud providers is, in the cloud there's a lot of partnerships, right? So you need to know what the service dependencies are, right? So for instance, software as a service, a lot of the products that offer software as a service are probably using somebody else's infrastructure.
Right.
Right? So you might have, say, a health fitness application that's a software as a service, but it's running on an Amazon Web Service infrastructure. So you need to know all the dependencies and how they relate to each other and make sure they can support your business requirements. Another very key question to ask is, where is the data located? Where does the cloud service provider store your data?
Right.
You know, there's a lot of regulations. You know, I don't know, you know, if you've heard about the GDPR, it's a European privacy regulation. We're in California right now, we have what they call the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act.
Yes.
There's PCI, there's HIPAA, there's all these regulations that mandate you have to keep your data secure. And they impose very strict penalties for people who do not have these secure controls. So you need to know where the cloud provider stores your data. And also there's another issue called data sovereignty. So what this means is, if your data is in certain countries, they could easily recall your data from the cloud service provider. You know, for instance, you may have data that's hosted in an unfriendly country, you know, to the US. So they could easily tell the cloud service provider, we need that data because it's within our borders. That's data sovereignty.
Right.
Another question you want to ask is something we call portability and interoperability of these cloud customers, the cloud providers' infrastructure. So you want to make sure that they're using technology that's compatible with the general technology that other companies are using, right? You do not want cloud service providers that are developing their systems using proprietary technology. Because the problem with that, you may end up in a situation called vendor lock-in, where you're locked into one provider because they're using specific technology that you cannot port over to another system.
Right.
And then the last thing I look for is something called key management, right? So in the cloud, we store data and it's encrypted using keys. So most cloud service providers, they offer key management options. So the most common is the cloud service provider key management option. Some providers may not have an option for the customer to manage their keys, but if you're in very heavily regulated environments, say like the government, they might want you to manage your own keys, because if the cloud service provider manages your keys, technically they have access to your data because they could use those keys to access your data. But if you're managing your keys, the cloud service provider will not have access to your data. So that's one thing you need to find out from the service provider. What key management options do they have? Do they have options like bring your own key, customer managed key? And then also, if you're going to take that option, you have to be able to invest in good practices, because when you're managing keys, you have to be able to rotate these keys periodically. You have to be able to revoke keys. So you need those good practices. So those are the main things I look for in a cloud service provider when we are vetting them.
Right. So say the customer has vetted their service provider. What are some of the biggest missteps or challenges an organization can fall into when implementing the cloud services? Okay,
good question. So what I tell people is, even before you move into the cloud, right? A lot of people are migrating to the cloud because it's fashionable, because it's chic, right? But I tell people, you need a business case to move into the cloud. You need to write down what's your business case, talk with your stakeholders. What's your business case to move to the cloud, right? And then once you do that, what are the use cases that you have? And then you need to study the different cloud service provider options so that you can see what's fit for your organization, right? Are you going to go infrastructure as a service? Are you going to go platform as a service, software as a service, depending on what your business is and what your business model is.
Right.
Once you've done that due diligence and you've decided to adopt a cloud service provider, one of the things we tell people is you need to, before you go into the cloud blindly, you need to have what we call cloud governance. So cloud governance is a set of principles and frameworks that you have that you're going to use to manage your cloud, right? It's going to be building blocks. It's like kind of your guiding rails. So you need to have some policies and frameworks written up that's going to guide you, right? So you can use things like AWS has a cloud adoption framework. Azure has a cloud adoption framework. Google Cloud as well has their own cloud adoption framework. You need to look at good controls that you can use in the cloud. The Cloud Security Alliance has what we call the CCM, control matrix, critical control matrix that you can use in the cloud. Tells you what are the good controls you need to adopt in the cloud. You need to look for these controls and policies so that you can use them to implement secure controls within your cloud.
Great.
So it sounds like there's a lot you should be doing before, like a lot of work that has to be done before you make missteps.
Right.
So can you just expand on that a little bit? I mean, what should I be doing? How can I avoid making missteps with cloud security?
Yes. So a lot of organizations blindly move into the cloud, right? Because it's very, very easy to deploy anything in the cloud, right? Because all you have to do is, procure the cloud service, put in your credit card, and in seconds you can start deploying infrastructure, right? So the first thing, like I've talked about, that we need to have before you step into the cloud is get your governance in order, right? So things you may do within your organization is maybe form what we call a cloud excellence, steering committee, right? With members from different organizations, right? So you need members from IT, security, business, legal, so you can identify what issues you may have in the cloud. Some of the issues we talked about, right? Regulatory issues. You need legal to chip into that, right? If we are going to the cloud, are we going to be impacted, right?
Right.
So once you do that, and then you develop your use cases. What are the use cases that I have that my organization needs in the cloud? I think if you do that, you'll have a better chance of success when you migrate to the cloud.
Right. Great. Does your security approach need to change depending on your environment or what services you're using?
Definitely. So we've talked about, so we have the different service models in the cloud, right? So we have infrastructure, like broadly speaking, we have three main service models. Infrastructure as a service, we have platform as a service, and software as a service. So each different service model has different responsibilities. When you look at what we call the shared responsibility model, the higher you go up the model, the more the cloud customer's responsibility is. So if we are looking at, say, software as a service, the cloud service provider is doing a lot of the responsibilities for you. So they're responsible for the operating system, for the infrastructure, for some of the applications, and the customer is just responsible for the data and access, things like that. When you go up the stack to infrastructure as a service, the cloud customer has more responsibility. So in infrastructure as a service, the cloud customer is responsible for the operating system. If you go into Amazon Web Services and create what we call an instance or a virtual machine, it's just a computer that's running in Amazon Web Services. You're responsible for that computer, you're responsible for the operating system, making sure the operating system, if it needs to have patches, if it's secure, like you have to do all this. Like Amazon Web Services is not going to do it for you. They give you the infrastructure to play with, they give you the kitchen, and you're the one who does all the cooking. And so you have to make sure you're using good practices. So for instance, say you're in the cloud and you're responsible for operating system. How do you know your operating system is secure, right? You can use things like hardened images. So if you look at, say, the Center for Internet Security, they have images that are hardened, right? Hardened means all the holes, they've tried as much as possible to make it as robust and as secure as possible, right? So you could use that type of image instead of you going ahead and creating the image yourself, right?
Right.
Another thing you could do that we're always preaching is something called infrastructure as code, right? Where you automate, instead of you manually creating this infrastructure, you're automating it. So you're creating what we call a baseline. You create a baseline, make sure you harden the image before you deploy it into production, right? So again, you could use, there's different guidelines, like the Center for Internet Security has hardening guidelines, right? They have secure configuration guidelines, say for Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, if it's Microsoft Azure, they tell you things you need to do to ensure that that system is secure. So the responsibility you have in the cloud when you're in infrastructure as a service is enormous. So you have to do the logging and monitoring. There's so many different things you need to do to ensure that your cloud is secure.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
See, so Sabrina, I told you that we'd had the most knowledgeable cloud security expert here, obviously.
Certainly
from
seems that way.
your extensive answers. But before we wrap up, I want to make sure, because you're going on and on about cloud security, is there anything that you really want to get out there that we haven't covered?
Well, if you're RSA, I'm speaking on Wednesday. Like I said, the title of it's actually the Learning Lab. Do not be a cloud misconfiguration statistic, so feel free to come by. If you want to get your hands on, get dirty in AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud, this is the place to do it.
How about advice for IT pros? Any
IT pros trying to get into cybersecurity?
Yeah, any advice, anything you want to, any wisdom that you can share?
So one of the things I tell people, because the cloud is it's so easy for, a lot of the IT folks love technology. They love to play with technology. So they've created something called shadow IT. What shadow IT is, it's a system where somebody says to the organization, I'm thinking about going to the cloud. Can you provision me a cloud so I can play with? And they slowly start putting up data in the cloud. But the problem with the shadow IT, they might start it as a test environment and sooner or later moves into a production environment. The challenge with the shadow IT is the data is now outside of the corporate governance of the organization. Because it's so easy for anyone to procure a cloud service, anybody can go into Amazon Web Services, open an account, and start storing companies' data up there without the company's knowledge. So you might not know that your data is hosted in the cloud. Maybe somebody say they're just doing it for testing, but now your data is in Amazon Web Services, and it might be critical data. So even for organizations, you need to implement tools, right? There's still things called CASBs. There's tools that can actually scan your environment and see what cloud services your employees are using. So you might want to look at something like that, and then you can get a population of cloud services that the organization goes to, and then you can go and ask the organization, okay, I see we have traffic to Amazon Web Services, to Oracle Cloud, to Alibaba, to all these different, to Dropbox. Who is using these services? And how are we using them? Are you storing companies' data in Dropbox? Okay, if you're storing companies' data in Dropbox, has it been authorized by the organization, right? Do we have any good security controls if you store, some of the security controls we say in the cloud data can be, because the cloud is on the internet, anybody virtually can access your data, right? So one of the main controls we tell people is you need to have multi-factor authentication. If you're on the cloud, if you're on anything that's on the internet, you need to have multi-factor authentication, because in the cloud, identity and access management is your first control, your primary control. When we were on premise, we had firewalls.
Right.
that were defending us, right? But now we are in the cloud. We don't have that anymore. So we need to have robust identity and access management. So we need to have good identity and access management controls where it's not easy for an outsider to come in and breach your cloud.
Right.
So those are the advice I would give people in the IT organization.
When we rolled out multi-factor authentication at TechTarget, it was kind of a pain on the end user.
Those extra text messages, though, you know, to verify it, they matter.
But we take your advice. We understand it's for the greater good.
Yeah.
So what's the name of your book? I'm sorry, my voice is cracking. What is the name of your book again?
Yes. So my book is called Cloud Security and Audit Fundamentals in AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. And the course is similar. It's Cloud Security and Audit Foundations, the LinkedIn Learning book course. Cloud Security and Audit Fundamentals in AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud.
And can we find the book on Amazon?
The book is on Amazon. The course is on LinkedIn Learning. So if you want to learn more about cloud security, you know, I've put in my best knowledge in there. That 2 hours. You know, you're not going to be a pro, but you know, we are constantly learning. I'm learning myself, right? It will give you a good idea of the good security practices that you need to implement in a cloud. So if you're a business owner, an organization that's trying to move into the cloud, but you do not know where to start, it's going to give you the fundamentals from explaining what is the cloud, what are the simple concepts, the service model. We didn't talk about the deployment models, right? Are you
we
in
only
a
have
private?
a half hour.
Yes. Are you in a private cloud? Are you like in a public cloud? Are you in a community cloud? What are the implications of that? So this kind of information you will get as far as what are the controls, what are the risks of the cloud, what are the top risks that you need to look out for when you're in the cloud, right? And how do you mitigate them?
Well, Michael Ratemo, cybersecurity expert. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
Yeah.
Please like and subscribe to Ion Tech.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here.